Hi, everybody. Second opportunity I've had to be on this stage, so thank you for everybody who's made that possible. I'm going to sit down in a second for this fireside chat, obviously slightly unusual one. I guess my first question is to Mr. Punk 6529. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, thank you.
There you go. We are live and we can chat. Obviously, it's slightly strange introducing someone who's anonymous and also not present. But maybe what would be interesting would be if you could describe a little bit how you managed to make this journey to create this, persona in the metaverse, and indeed, I guess amongst a few different things, attract institutional investors to come and back you in different ways and invest alongside you in NFTs, in art, but of different varieties, but also in projects that are pivotal to the open metaverse. What your kind of the beginning of this narrative about what your mission around the open metaverse is, and I think if anybody does some reading around, from Twitter, for example, around Punk 6529, you'll see that, he's, I think, enlightened in as much as that he realizes that if we're going to achieve such a lofty ambition as to build the open metaverse, it's going to require that we foment a kind of a passion for the open sea, which is a fragment of a quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And so I think that's the level of his ambition. So I'd just love him to expand on how he's managed to pull all of that off whilst remaining behind the scenes. So over to you for your own introduction.
Sure, great, thank you. And thank you very much for having me. Let me start with what the goal is, and then I think I can work backwards to why I use a PFP, because I think they're not independent from each other. They have to do with each other. I've been in crypto for about a decade now. And while we've had many technical accomplishments, and while we have also had many monetary accomplishments, the number on the whole and over time has gone up. The part that, to me, we have not succeeded as well as one would have hoped is actually building decentralized infrastructure. The industry on the whole works on centralized infrastructure, something we've all seen over the last few days, right? This is, the chaos of the last 2 days will be credited to decentralized crypto networks. It will be used by people who do not like cryptocurrency to say, look, this is what we were saying, but there was nothing decentralized crypto network about it, right? It was just another centralized entity. Everything was, all the failings there came from centralization. And the reason I think is the case that this happened, while people, there's a small percentage of people, 1-2%, who might be interested in the completely theoretical reasons why you should host your own node and have your own self-sovereign wallet. In practice, most people choose convenience. And not just most people, I don't mean the proverbial retail. Most crypto-heavy people choose convenience. Many serious crypto people are using centralized infrastructure. And what I realized a couple of years ago was that NFTs were different. NFTs, because of their composability and interactivity, tended to run natively on-chain as the first point. And secondly, because they were interesting, fun, an application layer above the network, people liked using them. There was a motivation for someone who might have not been bothered to set up a Bitcoin wallet to figure out how to use MetaMask to buy an ape. And what I realized is that, well, that's really interesting because we've never seen that before, right? Like, technology matures, technology becomes consumer ready when you talk about the applications of technology more than the technology itself, right? Instagram uses Python, but nobody says use Instagram because they use Python. They use Instagram because it's interesting to take pictures of yourself at the beach. Likewise, CryptoPunks use the Ethereum consensus model, but I didn't buy this particular CryptoPunk because of some view on proof of work or proof of stake. I know exactly how it works, but I bought it because I thought it was cool, right? That was why I actually bought it. And so I said, oh, well, this is really interesting, and it's not just something that's interesting for cartoon profile pictures. NFTs can be a generic container, a generic transportation technology for all digital intangibles, which is a gigantic category, right? It's about an $80 trillion, intangibles are an $80 trillion existing category. And then over time, non-fungible physical goods, but the first one being the most important. They said, well, that's interesting. We have possibly the interoperable system to foundationally build an open metaverse. And what's a metaverse? A metaverse is simply the internet with better visualization, thousands of applications today on the web and time augmented reality, and there's this pathway in between. So this was my thought process. This is where I was, let's say, March of 2021. And I launched my 6529 pseudonymously for two reasons. The first reason is, well, do I believe we will have digital identities in the metaverse, and will those identities necessarily be your LinkedIn photo? Yeah, I believe that, right? And there's no reason it has to be your LinkedIn photo. For some people it can be, it's absolutely fine. So I said, well, if that's true, I like to learn by doing. And I thought, well, let me start in this model and see what it feels like. And then the other part was, I wanted to check the quality of my ideas, quite frankly. I had an existing presence of some type on Twitter and the crypto community, and I want to say, look, I don't want to use that. I want to start fresh. I want to start with literally 0 followers and start tweeting things and seeing if I was right, because if I'm right, it's a very big idea. Right? I hadn't seen anyone quite frame it this way. And I wanted to see if the idea would stand on its merits without any pluses or minuses or distractions from anything I had previously done or written. So that was kind of the background of how it started. Let me take a pause there, see if you have any questions, and I'll say, well, how has that worked or not worked, or if it's been difficult or easy?
Yeah, so what I've taken away from that is that I think we can agree at some high level that we can see some calamities that can occur, economically, politically, privacy breaches personally from, central digital utilities. And so therefore there's a visceral, emotional desire and justification for moving away from that and to something that is open and decentralized. And that as we contemplate that move to the metaverse, we perhaps don't want it to be the metaverse, we want it to be the open verse of some type. But I have, and also I think we've started there, you've started to lay out the way in which, there's more to NFTs than meets the eye. That NFTs themselves can represent a form of digital identity in this open verse. But I have a couple of questions related to those. Well, first, actually, I want to kind of poll the audience. Who here actually owns an NFT? Let's start with that. So I would have said about 50% of the audience. Who here uses their NFT in the manner that this particular punk does to represent themselves in a sort of social media world to some degree? Who does that? Yeah, so probably about 10%. I would have thought. So I think that's useful to context for us. So I think what I think would be interesting if you could expand upon is that notion of it's not just about art when you come to sort of PFPs, and obviously there's many other types of NFTs as well. You could talk about that. It's about identity. How is that going to evolve? And are we ready for that? Are there bits of infrastructure missing? Interoperability and so forth. And then on the motivation side, again, we can have this visceral motivation for making the shift, but quite often, people are incredibly complacent about issues like that. Nobody worries that the barn door is open till the horse is bolted, about getting an insurance or whatever. So how do we find motivations? How do we find something will help us actually ensure that Meta does not co-opt the metaverse, and we don't tend, as you've written, by default to a centralized metaverse in the future? So 2 questions. Expand on decentralized identity, and how can we actually avoid that calamity?
Sure. So let me split them and let me take, because they're different questions. I think one message that I would say in my experience now, a year and a half, using 659 as an identity is, I think one day all of you are going to do it. I don't think it is that radical. We've had pseudonymous authors in the past, we had bulletin boards in the past, right? If you go back to the 1990s, people would log into bulletin boards and wouldn't necessarily put their full name and their social security number, right? They might have just a username. This is the same concept, and it is very interesting to me because about a few months before I started, I had read Balaji Srinivasan's blog post, I think, who said, in the future we're all going to have different online and on-chain identities, and I literally thought to myself, why would I want such a thing? I have my Twitter account, I have my LinkedIn, I have my Facebook, it's fine. And now, it's obvious why I would want such a thing, right? It's not something that's very specific to me. There are different parts of my life, and different parts of my life, on Facebook, my high school friends can find out that I ate pizza, and that's fine. I think it's basically completely irrelevant to anyone in this audience, right? If someone here follows me on Twitter, why do they care that I had pizza? Why do they need to know that, right? But and my high school friends, I'm pretty sure don't need or want to listen 27 times a day about the open metaverse, right? And so this ability to use different identities for different reasons, I think it's perfectly normal, it's perfectly straightforward. I think more people will do it over time. Does it break? Can you really do it all the way through? Not really, right? There are certain things that might be hard to change. Obviously, taxes and legal items, I can't file my 1040 with Punk 6529, right? Bank accounts, same things, right? So is most of the infrastructure for 6529 on-chain? Yes. Do we have normal fiat infrastructure? Of course. Do those live in the normal world? Yes. But even things that don't need to be this way. Many services look for real names, they look for telephone numbers, I end up, for sometimes, just not signing up for them or having a team member sign up for them. And as more of those become Web3ified, where you can sign up with a Ethereum wallet or any other, I think it's going to be better. And I actually don't think, a lot of people say, oh, well, this is pseudonymous, how do we know, how do we trust? It's a higher level of trust. What level of trust do you have that any account on any social media platform is genuine? Close to zero, right? We're having this big fight now on Twitter. And certainly it doesn't transport across social media accounts. Whereas I have a persistent reputation as Punk6529 and 6529.eth, and they're on specific Ethereum addresses. And if I use them on a wide variety of social media applications, gaming applications, financial applications, someone can pull together a very consistent and coherent history of this person acts in a repeatable manner. And I think that's what's interesting. They don't specifically need to know what's on my driver's license, right? And it is a higher level of trust than what we have today with social media accounts, and a much simpler model than trying to guess who is who, right? I think it's a harder model. So let's put that as the decentralized identity topic, right? Do people not take the right steps until it's too late? Yes, this is the normal case, right? The normal case is that there has been, both at an individual level, at an organizational level, and at a governmental level, a complete and utter failure to understand what changed between Web 1 and Web 2. Web 1 has nothing to do with cryptocurrency. It is decentralized and interoperable. I can use SMTP to send an email, and so can anyone else in the world, and there's not one person in charge of email, and there's no one in charge of checking if every single person's emails are correct or incorrect, and there's a wide variety of centralized providers that offer email services, of which I use many of them, and that's absolutely fine because there are no switching costs, very limited switching costs to email. And so people can switch, and so everyone, even the centralized providers, more or less behave. The same is true of websites of HTML and TCP/IP and web servers. It is decentralized. It is standards-based. We lost that in Web 2. We lost that with Twitter and Facebook, but also the app stores and what have you. And all modern internet activity runs through 5 or 6 firms. This is bad for innovation, obviously. It creates rent-seeking. The people think that it might be reasonable that Apple takes 30% or Facebook wants to take 45% of revenue in their Metaverse product. This is clear rent-seeking. And it has led to societal disruption. The United States has been on a 2-year, very intense argument on who gets a Twitter account. And apparently that answer changes based on who's the CEO of Twitter. But that is if you think that Twitter is effectively the short messaging protocol of the internet in the English language, this is a very strange architecture that we decide in the English-speaking world who gets to send short messages online based on who the CEO of Twitter is. Who cares who the CEO of Twitter is? Why should that matter one bit? This has nothing to do with whether Elon is better or worse than Parag. It actually shouldn't matter at all. I don't think anyone in this audience can name who the product manager is of Gmail, and that's correct. Who cares? That's an issue for Google, right? It's not an issue of national importance. And so, it is true, we have walked into a centralized world without thinking about it too much. I think it is generally unhealthy. And then the question is, well, how do you reverse that, right? And arguably, what I'm going to say is, you have to win on consumer experience and on fun. You can't just lecture people. I've tried lecturing people. When I say these things, people look at you like you're strange. What's the problem, 6529? My Facebook account's fine. What's the issue, right? I go there and I post pictures of my kid. What's the problem? Why is this a problem? It doesn't seem like a large societal problem. So the interesting thing about NFTs, which are very different than all prior cryptocurrencies, is they can actually transport and express a whole range of social activities. Yes, collectibles. Yes, art. Yes, gaming objects. Yes, arbitrary digital objects. Yes, social organizations. You can actually model and express a social organization with NFTs. And so you pull people in not because of some deep theoretical discussion about internet architecture. Just like people didn't use email because someone explained to them that SMTP is decentralized and therefore it's a good reason to use email. People used email because of the utility of using email. They sent an email from themselves to someone else. This is the same thing. NFTs have practical consumer level, and I would argue organizational level, utility that might bring people naturally on chain. Something like that is my mental model here.
So I have to make a confession, which is some of this is very hard for me to hear, I think, because the audio is tuned that way rather than this way, but I'm doing my best to follow. The one thing that you've written about, actually, which I think echoes something that our friend Yuval Harari has written about, which is that we only really get something achieved through our human ability to believe in a fictional future, to follow a narrative, a story, a dream, or perhaps to be part of a meme. People, these virtual identities effectively coalesce around these memes, so you've written, and that we can perhaps create new organizational structures as a result. And so before we perhaps sort of try and finish off with how you might entreaty the individuals in the audience and beyond to do their part, if they believe in it, in trying to preserve the openness of the metaverse, Can you expand a bit on that concept of memes as sort of amassed, individuals in the metaverse, and how those are more important even than that digital land that we're building?
Sure. I believe this concept of the intersubjective of myths, as Ari describes it, is in fact very important. It is, I believe, the apex object of any human society. People will die for the American flag, let's say, right? Obama said, yes, we can. Donald Trump said, make America great again. They sound like little catchphrases, but each one of those catchphrases gave them access to nuclear weapons. Just do it and the swoosh creates a tremendous amount of incremental cash flow for Nike, right? So in all human societies above 100, 200 people, this is the Yuval point directly, need some intersubjective frameworks to organize themselves. The very fancy way is to call them, intersubjective. He popularized them, he calls them myths. Memes are kind of the same thing. And what's interesting in the concept of, that's how I use memes, let's say. You can actually own, transport, compose the meme directly, the intersubjective myth directly. It's a weird mental leap, I grant you, right? And it's one of those mental leaps the same way that Bitcoin was a mental leap, and NFTs are a mental leap, and CC0 public domain NFTs are a mental leap. But I think it is a correct mental leap. We have, there was a time before mortgage-backed securities that you could not trade mortgages. They were sitting in your local community bank's filing cabinet, in effect. Here, we have the ability to directly own, monetize, transport what I think ultimately will be the apex object of society, and there can be a way, in that way, to organize humans, organize society, and drive the type of change we might want. What it's going to be, it depends on the person, right? There's no right answer. It depends on the objective and the person and the organization. So I'll say this, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone, but it's unlikely that there are a few people more bullish on how much impact NFTs could have over the coming decades. I think they're a foundational technology. They're a horizontal technology. I think people should not get caught up on, do they like this ape or do they like this gaming object? That doesn't matter very much, right? That's just an application of a broader technology that allows us to directly own, manipulate, network, compose arguably the most important objects in a modern society, which are the intangibles.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So it just leaves me to thank you very much indeed, Punk6529, for joining us at TOKEN2049. And I hope everybody will give a big round of applause, and I hope that we get to continue the conversation here or in the metaverse.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.